Happy New Year. It is our new year. It's our new liturgical year. And this year, year B, we're going to be focusing on the Gospel of Mark, but not today. Deacon Tom and I have decided to offer you a special sermon series for Advent, which begins today. And so here we go. The Gospel of Matthew now opens with a genealogy, a listing of Jesus' ancestors. Matthew wrote for the Jewish community. It was important to show them that Jesus was descended from King David, because the Messiah was expected to be born of his line. Matthew's genealogy is Joseph's lineage, and you may think that's a bit strange, but Mary is also mentioned. And by marrying Joseph in Jewish law, she also became a descendant of the house of David. There are 4 other women, all from the Old Testament, who are mentioned in the genealogy: Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and Bathsheba. They are the subjects of our sermons this Advent. As you can see from Deacon Tom's chart, Tamar is the first woman mentioned. In today's reading, that long reading, that's our whole story, she has twins by Judah. And one of them, Perez, like Tamar, is an ancestor of both David and of Jesus. Tamar is a Canaanite, a Gentile. Canaanites worshipped Baal, a fertility god who had a lot of bad press in the Bible. In fact, all 4 of the Old Testament female ancestors are Gentiles, not Hebrews. Tamar, Rahab, and Ruth, like Arabs and Jews, are all Semitic people. There are many generations in this genealogy between Tamar and Rahab, the next woman. Rahab is a resident of Jericho, one of the oldest continuous settlements in the world, about 11,000 years old, still there. She may also be a Canaanite. Rahab gave birth to Boaz, who married Ruth. She came from an area east of the Dead Sea. Today, it's part of the highlands in Jordan. Their baby was Obed, who begat Jesse, who was the father of King David, who married Bathsheba, the Hittite. A little bit confusing there, but basically we've got Boaz and Ruth having a baby named Obed, and Obed having a son named Jesse, and Jesse is the father of King David, okay? And then he marries Bathsheba, who is not actually mentioned by name, but she's the wife of Uriah the Hittite in the reading. Hittites were not Semitic people. They were Indo-Europeans. They had migrated from India toward the Black Sea in Europe and finally settled in what now is Syria. David and Bathsheba's son was King Solomon. After that, there's a long list of men in the genealogy who lead to Joseph at the very end. If you'd like to read the whole genealogy, if some night you need a little help getting to sleep, just turn to the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew. So let's talk about Tamar, who had an encounter with Judah, who was one of the 12 sons of Jacob. He was number 4. If you've ever seen Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, you probably know who Judah was. He convinced his brothers, who were about to kill Joseph, to sell him to some passing slave traders instead. As one of the leaders of the 12 tribes of Israel, Judah's name was used to identify the area around Jerusalem, Judea. And eventually the words Jew and Jewish also came from his name. As Tamar's story begins, she marries Er. A horrible name. I'm so glad it didn't become a popular biblical name for boys. He is Judah's oldest son, but he did a bad thing. We don't know what it was, and God smote him. At that time, something called levirate marriage was practiced. When an oldest son died, the second son married the wife. But there was a catch. Any children born of the union were considered to be the sons of the dead brother. And the oldest son would therefore inherit a double share of his dead father's property. The biological father got nothing. The second son, Onan, marries Tamar next, and he dies. God is unhappy with him too, because Onan has made sure he won't get Tamar pregnant. No kids? He figures he'll get the double share of the inheritance. And there's yet another son, Shelah, but he is too young to get married. So Judah tells Tamar to wait until Shelah's older, and he sends her off to live with her father. This is not good news for Tamar. She cannot be a member of either Judah or her father's household. Her father doesn't have to take care of her. She's a widow, so she's without support of any kind. She can't remarry. She feels shame. At that time, a woman's only purpose was to produce children, preferably male, and she wanted to fulfill that purpose. She was a righteous woman who knew the promise God had made to Abraham, that he would be the father of a great nation, that his descendants would be numerous as the stars in the sky. Shelah grew up, but Judah had no intention of marrying him to Tamar. As far as he was concerned, she was the black widow who would cause his only remaining son to die. Tamar knew exactly what Judah was up to. Whenever she went out, she probably saw people whispering about her, moving away from her, giving her strange looks. She's desperate, but she takes the initiative. That is why she is in this genealogy. She takes on the duty of providing an heir. She acts against the established order to further God's purpose and God's promise to Abraham. She moves away from the letter of the law, risking her honor and perhaps her life. The narrator of this story knew that. Without her actions, the line of ancestors would produce, without her actions, the line of ancestors would not produce King David, and that was a big risk. And we know that the birth of Jesus was at risk too. Judah's wife dies, and for some reason, he decides to go to the city of Timnah to shear his sheep, but he forgets his wallet. Tamar, learning Judah is headed for Timnah, and knowing that Shelah is not going to be showing up anytime soon, changes her widow's weeds for more seductive attire, wears a veil, and sits at the entrance to a town on the road to Timnah, Enim. Judah, probably missing his wife and definitely not recognizing Tamar when he gets to Enim, suggests they might spend a bit of time together. Tamar is clever. She has a plan and must have guessed that Judah wouldn't have anything to do with him that could be used, that Judah wouldn't have anything with him that could be used as a payment. He promises her a baby goat for her services, but she wants something of his in pledge of this future goat payment. So she asks for his staff, which would have had Judah's mark on it. And she asks for his signet and cord. The signet was a seal suspended on the cord. It was used as a kind of signature, pressed into soft clay to sign contracts. And it was unique to Judah, one of a kind. He gave her everything she asked for. And just like that, she was pregnant. Notice, by the way, how the narrator of this story never morally judges either Tamar or Judah. Of course, Judah wanted his signet back, so when he got home, he sent his friend out with the baby goat to find her. But she had returned to her father's house and resumed her widowhood. Jonah's friend asked the town people of Anim where the prostitute was. They were clueless, couldn't figure out what he was talking about. On hearing that news, Judah didn't want to pursue the matter. He'd been bested by this unknown woman and didn't want to look like a fool and be laughed at. 3 months later, he hears gossip about Tamar. She's pregnant. Big scandal. And Judah is furious. He wants her burned. But Tamar's careful planning pays off. She produces the staff, the signet, and the cord. A big reveal scene. Judah, who probably could have denied what happened and gotten away with it, admits his dalliance. He acknowledges that Tamar's righteousness trounces his fearful withholding of his son Shelah from her. Alice Connor, who wrote a book called Fierce Women of the Bible, which we read some months ago in our book club, said this scene is, quote, like an ancient episode of Maury Povich. You, Judah, you are the father. At this point, we may ask ourselves, why was this story told in the Old Testament? And why is Tamar named in Jesus' genealogy when so many women are not? Honestly, I wouldn't be able to suggest an answer to that question, except that when I was trained as an interim rector about 16 years ago, my instructor was a rabbi who talked about the story of Judah's father, Jacob, and his older twin brother, Esau. He pointed out that when Christians talk about how deceitful Jacob stole his brother's birthright and tricked his father into giving him the blessing intended for his older brother, we Christians aren't understanding what the story is actually about. He tells us that when a Jewish person reads that story, he or she focuses on how Esau much too willingly sells his birthright to Jacob for a, quote, mess of pottage, a stew. The rabbi pointed out that Esau is failing to honor the covenant between Abraham and God, a covenant that promised abundance and countless children to a righteous people who would keep God's laws. Jacob, not Esau, the rabbi said, truly got it. I never forgot that. So when I read this story, I understood that Tamar, another trickster, another wily, deceitful person, a Gentile, was also focused on the promise that God made to Abraham. She lived into the promise in abundance and the necessity of being a righteous person who keeps God's laws. Tamar gave birth to those twin boys. Which one was born first is a bit confusing, but it is Perez who will carry on the line that will lead to King David and Jesus. What we do see in Tamar's story is that God often works through people who live on the edge of the expectations of those with worldly morality. And in doing this, these marginal people, like Tamar, accomplish God's purposes. The women we will discuss this Advent challenge the status quo. They behave righteously, and babies are born. And yes, sometimes it's necessary for them to go beyond the law to fulfill the law, to preserve their community and continue to be in covenant with God. Genesis doesn't tell us anything more about Tamar, but we know what we need to know. Here is a picture of your bulletin in color. We'll wait for it to come up. So these are the four women, a modern representation, obviously, of the four women who will be talking about this Advent. Tamar is first, and she may be holding a signet. It's kind of hard to tell. Rahab is next with a red cord, then Ruth with a sheaf of wheat, and finally Bathsheba with a baby. You'll have to come back for the next 3 weeks to hear what that's all about. Amen.
Amen.